All right, you ready to do it? All right, here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Guy McPherson here. Very excited to welcome my guest today, Dr. Karol Darsa. Karol, welcome.
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. So Dr. Darsa receives her doctorate in clinical psychology from the California Graduate Institute and has about 20 years of clinical and administrative experience in trauma and mental health disorders. Dr. Darsa began her career in 1998 as a foster care social worker and continued her work with abused children and their families and adults abused as children. Dr. Darsa later worked as a trauma specialist in private practice and at a variety of treatment centers, including Clearview, Moonview Sanctuary, and PCH. Now, I just also want to mention here in 2012, Dr. Darsa became the co-creator of Invisible War Recovery, a program designed to treat military sexual trauma survivors. This sparked a passion for Dr. Darsa to develop and create her own trauma recovery program in the form of Reconnect Integrative Trauma Treatment Center. We'll dive into this as we get on here. Karol, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you again.
All right. So before we get going here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you're calling from now, and we'll dive in.
Okay. I'm calling right now from Los Angeles, California. I'm actually born in Turkey and raised between Turkey and Spain. And then I
Oh, wow.
came here right after high school to go to college, really 28 years ago, and ended up staying there, did my whole career, my whole education. So this is where I spend most of my life now in Los Angeles.
Awesome. So, all right, let's dive in here. I'm a big believer in kind of getting to the heart of what's going on. How did you get involved, interested, and passionate about this field, this
Yeah,
work?
it's interesting. Ever since I know myself, I think the only topic that was my interest was psychology. I even as a teenager, I didn't like reading books. I wasn't like a good student or anything, but in psychology class, I was the best.
Really?
All I read, self-help book, just anything about psychology. And so I always wanted to work with people. And I had my own attachment trauma, which probably is the main reason of why I was always interested in the work of trauma. And then I wanted to work with kids, so I started as a foster care social worker, and of course that's all you have there, right?
Mhm.
Trauma. And then when I had my own kids, I said, kids at home, kids at work, it's a little bit too much. Let me focus more on adulthood, and I changed my focus a little bit to that.
So talk to us, Karol, about this, about trauma, dealing with trauma professionally. And, you referenced your own trauma. How did that come into your awareness? Talk to us about that journey.
Sure. Uh, I guess working really in any part of the psychology, I became more and more aware of the importance of what happens to the person's background, right from their childhood. So the environment, much more than how a person is born. Again, probably because of my own experience, but then really meeting everyone and seeing it was sort of like a one-on-one formula. Okay, you have a symptom, let me ask about your background. Right away, there's a reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what made me very much sure that everything comes down to trauma. Even before I got licensed, I started studying EMDR, and then later on somatic therapies. And then I said, oh, here we go. It's just very easy to find very specific techniques to help people rather than just sort of talking. Because
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning of my career, I was much more interested in just talking. I love to talk. And so I thought, you can resolve anything with talking. And then as I went into the trauma work, I said, maybe not so much. Maybe there's other ways to really help the trauma work. And so that's how I got into all of these different techniques that I studied.
So you mentioned your own trauma. Would you feel comfortable talking about that?
I can tell you briefly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
I grew up between the two countries. So I was half of my life in one country with one parent, and then in the summers with another parent, which was an extremely unusual thing in the 70s, especially in Turkey. I think I was the only child who had divorced parents. It was even a secret. Only my closest friends knew. So there was a lot of family dynamic difficulties in growing up between the two countries and missing family
Mm.
members, and really missing the opportunity to grow up with a intact family unit. And at that time I thought, I'm okay, I'm very resilient. But only as I grew up and I started getting into relationships that I started realizing how much that has impacted me. So the attachment trauma is definitely a passion for me. The importance of relationships in the healing is a very important factor. Again, I saw that in my own experience.
So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now and how your knowledge of trauma has contributed to how you're helping people now.
Uh, well, before my knowledge is really my training. I have EMDR, brain spotting, somatic experiencing, sensorimotor, and then a specific energy medicine method that I've studied over the 22 years that I'm in this field. So
Okay.
what I started seeing is that the combination of different tools and techniques is really what makes it best. When I was going to school, you had to sort of choose an orientation. You've probably been through the same thing. But now I know you can't, it has to be eclectic. You have to include the body. Without the body work, without some sort of a grounding mindfulness type of orientation, you can't do trauma work. And so all of that really formed my style. And then I was working in different rehabs as a trauma specialist. I would go in once a week to see clients, and then I noticed they were just like almost afraid of seeing me. They were saying, "Oh no, that's the therapist that's coming and is going to make me cry, or is going to open my trauma again for an hour, and she's leaving, and then I see her next week." So I realized no treatment center was really offering just trauma. They were saying they do trauma work, but it was much more addiction based.
Mm.
So I opened the doors about 8 years ago with just a center that will do only trauma work in an intensive way, and doing more individual therapy rather than group therapy. Because in the group therapy, there's more talk and understanding and insight, but I think people have to really feel it, process it, and feel it in their body. And the only way that, in my opinion, that you can do that is through the use of body and in individual sessions. That's how I opened actually Reconnect, based on all these different philosophies.
Okay. So you're saying a lot here. I want to kind of pinpoint, going back to uh, the many kind of treatment modalities that you've studied. First of all, the brain spotting, what David Grand, right? Okay. So he was a previous guest on the podcast. Give our listener just a kind of a brief summation of what brain spotting is.
Sure. David Grant was actually a teacher of EMDR and somatic experience, and he was trained in both. And in the EMDR, if you know it, there's eye movements that one has to do in order to process a stuck trauma in the cognitive brain to bring it up to the emotional brain. So when he was doing eye movement, he realized that rather than the moving of the eyes, but if you can find one spot corresponding to the trauma and stay there, a person can actually process the trauma without sort of like bypassing the thinking brain and just able to really go into the feelings about it, and gets the person unstuck, right? So it's really utilizing a visual spot that corresponds to the feeling, to the trauma, and then has a lot of mindfulness and somatic sort of tracking
Mm-hmm.
techniques that helps the person to process and digest what happened.
Okay. And in terms of, you mentioned the power of kind of a variety of modalities that one can choose from. Talk to the people out there who are listening to this and going, "Oh my God, how am I going to get all this stuff under my belt?" I mean, what would you say to that?
Well, anything that's body oriented would be my first choice of training. But I actually, it's funny, I forgot to mention to you earlier, but I have created a training program that I call it Rhythm, which stands for Reconnect Integrative Trauma Treatment Model. So I am teaching tools from EMDR, tools from brain spotting, and tools from different somatic techniques all into one, and tools from Gestalt therapy. So that is one way a person can learn all of it all at the same time.
Interesting. Okay.
Otherwise, you're right. I mean, everything is this is 22 years of experience I'm sharing.
Right.
But
So,
anything body oriented would be the first to go.
Okay. So is it safe to say that the recommendation is to start off with something body based and just build up your repertoire in a sense from there? Because we'll talk a little bit more about why it's important to have all these, at least some knowledge, right, of these different treatment modalities, and not just focus on EMDR or sensorimotor psychotherapy or somatic experiencing, et cetera.
Well, I think because every client is so different that when you have only one tool in your hand, and if that doesn't work, then what do you do?
Right.
I don't believe in rigidity. Some people are like, I only do this and I don't want to do anything else. It's almost like a sibling rivalry sometimes among modalities. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm a believer that I'm going to try one thing, and if this doesn't work. So I started with first EMDR and it worked for many people. But then for people who were so dysregulated, that didn't create enough resourcing, in my opinion. It was missing the body, especially when I got trained. And so I said, let me see. So I started with somatic experiencing and right away with sensorimotor. I studied sort of at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And when you include the body in the processing, a person can tolerate the negative feelings or the negative memories that are coming up much more than if it was just the EMDR. That's the reason why I do believe combination works better than single. So, and the same thing goes with the body. There are clients who can't tolerate even the word body, yet forget along even just grounding or tracking the body. They can't. They just think it's too much for them. And so when that happens, what do? Then I draw on the other modalities. So it just depends on who your client is.
So you've been doing this for a while. I want to invite you to share a kind of an early clinical error or mistake or mishap, and what you learned from that.
Maybe a couple of typical mistakes I used to do. One is maybe focusing too much on insight. I am a very analytical person. My brain works that way. But with trauma, you can't be so analytical. It's not just about understanding why or what it is. So I would just focus on the inside and think, okay, that's it. Good. The client had an insight and I feel all good.
Can you get specific? Do you remember a particular client? Obviously, without disclosing who that is.
Right. Oh, let me think. Yes, I had this female who was sexually abused, which is often my specialty now, where she she didn't understand why her symptoms were such, right? So she had really typical PTSD symptoms of not being able to sleep and everything, so I kind of did an over like questioning of detailed of what happened to her to understand. And then with that understanding, she started getting dysregulated. Of course, as a new therapist, I didn't even notice that she was really leaving her body. And then I went into, okay, that you understand, sort of really focusing on her capacity to understand that. And then when she left the session, she actually felt much worse because there was no grounding, no resourcing, no containment. And here I thought, yay, I had a great session because the client had a remembrance, right? Memory of what happened. And then when she came back the next time, she actually had more flashbacks, worse nightmares. And I was like, oh my God, what did I do? And I think was even getting angry at me for feeling worse. So this is when I started going more into the somatic world of let me see how I can help the client to ground and resource before I open something
Mm-hmm.
so big and thinking that she just has to remember what happened.
So you have a book out. Let's
Yeah,
talk about that.
sure. I like
The,
to
tr-
share.
the trauma map. Awesome. Okay. And can people get this on Amazon or your website or both?
Amazon. I think my website too, but on Amazon. Yeah, both.
Okay. Okay. We'll have that linked up at the show notes page also at the traumatherapistpodcast.com.
Yeah. So the trauma map is written for clients. It's for general public. What's happened is over the years when clients would come in and they ask me same questions over and over again, I find myself that a big portion of my work was really about psychoeducation, especially with trauma. People blame themselves so much. And if they understand what trauma is and what it does to a person, then it's almost like 50% of the work can be done really, because there's much more empathy and understanding. So since I was repeating the same information a lot and clients were asking me for books, there are great books out there, by the way, but a lot of them are written in a more sophisticated language.
Mhm.
And then the client said, I can't understand. I have a hard time to focus and everything. So I said, why don't I write a book that's much simpler to understand about what trauma is, and along with specific exercises, because I give these exercises to clients. So I thought that would be a great resource for me. Here, along with our sessions, here's on page, this is the exercise I want you to do this time. So a client can really take that into a session and follow it.
Okay. So let's get more specific. How's the book broken down?
So in the book, I talk about my main philosophy, which is trauma creates disconnect inside of the person. You can get disconnected from your mind, from your heart, from your body, from outside loved ones or God, spirituality, or nature. So I have different chapters for each. So disconnect from the
Oh,
mind.
interesting.
How do the symptoms look like? What does it mean? If you have these symptoms, you're disconnected. And then I have actual steps of what to do to reconnect with yourself. So for each section that I just mentioned to you, it has a different chapters along with exercises to do.
Interesting. The first thing that came to my mind, Carol, was moral injury, which oftentimes combat veterans talk about. And I'm wondering if you found in your experience that, and I know it's difficult to generalize, but I'm going to ask this question anyway. Have you found that different traumatic experiences or different traumas affect those different aspects, one's heart, one's mind, one's body, etc.?
I would say mostly with the body, yes, such as if it's a physical oriented assault or sexual assault, then almost automatically there's a disconnect from the body in order not to feel the pain. And maybe emotional attachment type of things is more about numbing from the emotions, disconnected from the heart or emotions, as I call it. Bigger events could create more disconnect from God or spirituality or faith, such as COVID or even loss of a child, something that's so unexpected, where it could be a sense of anger towards God.
Mm-hmm.
In general, yes, but I can't say that each time it's this type of thing, but yeah, maybe generally.
Okay, so the trauma map is written for clients. You've got it broken down in specific ways. Um, I mean, a lot of people who are listening to this are therapists. Would you say that might be a good book for them to recommend to their clients, et cetera?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Especially because it has a good little exercises for them to do. And I see this almost like a stabilization phase, because in trauma you're looking at three phases, right? The stabilization, the processing, and the integration. So in the stabilization, there's a necessity for the body, the mindfulness, and really sort of increasing the tolerance for the emotions. So I think definitely therapists can give this to their clients in the beginning.
Okay. So
I
are
am
you
working on a second book, by the way, FYI, which
okay?
will be for the therapist. And that's going to be for the rhythm model that I just talked about. Because I'm doing trainings right now for therapists.
Okay.
It's going to accompany the trainings, or you can buy it separately too, with good case examples, really one by one, of how to work with these techniques.
Okay. So let me just reintroduce you. We're speaking with Karol Darsa. Carol, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Email
Okay.
drdarsa@reconnectcenter.com.
Reconnectcenter.com. And where can they find info about these trainings?
On the website as well,
Okay. And that's Reconnect.
reconnectcenter.com.
Okay. So how are you dealing with this work? I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. Obviously, you're specializing in trauma. How are you dealing with all this work? And when I say that, I mean the trauma work.
You mean personally? Is it end
Yeah,
up?
personally.
It's interesting. It doesn't. I think what's happening is I have studied on this energy medicine method for 18 years now, which is all based about the importance of grounding and
Mm-hmm.
really making sure that you stay present inside of your body, that your energy is not dispersed and you are not going out of your own body. And I do this very regularly. And then I work on myself constantly. So it's either via therapy or coaching, or I have a mentor. So I'm constantly really watching to see how I am doing emotionally, like even in my private life, so that it doesn't get transferred into my work. But I have learned to energetically really create a boundary where the moment I walk out of a session, that session is closed for me. I don't take it with me home at all.
What is the energy medicine training or modality that you're talking about here?
It's called Chris Technique. It's unfortunately not available in the US. I actually been going to Germany a couple of times a year, except since now there's COVID. But I've studied with my teacher. Her name is Christine Schenk. I think if you do christineschenk.com or christechnique.com, you
Okay.
can read it. She has a couple of books in English as well that one can buy from Amazon. So it is about really understanding that we are two bodies. We have a physical body, tangible, and then we have an energy body. And then the importance of your energy body staying inside of your physical body in order to be stronger and not to be impacted by other people's
Hmm.
issues or energies. That's really the basic, of course, that I'm explaining to you. But it has been a lifesaver for me. I wish she was in the States.
Wow, wow. So, I mean, obviously, or not obviously, but I'm thinking of, when you're working with someone who's been impacted by trauma, obviously you want to have that connection, right? That human to human connection, but also you're talking about creating a boundary. So how is that? How are you walking that tightrope in a sense?
When I first started working, I would cry with clients. And I would say, oh, that's great because that's empathic. But what I learned over the years, that's not necessarily a good sign of empathy or a bad sign of empathy, but it's that I wasn't protecting myself. Or maybe I was going into my own remembrance. If they're talking about how they're separate from their parents, maybe I was thinking of mine, and then I would get teary eyed. So I'm just so present when I work with a client. I'm not thinking of anything else anymore. So it's not if it ever triggers anything from my childhood or from my personal life, I literally go, whoop, come back, just be
Mhm.
present. So I'm just fully focused. I usually sit like straight up position like a soldier so that I can be really there, and I just watch myself to be present. And that's how I think it is. I've never heard anyone thinking that I'm not empathic, but I don't have to
No, I
cry.
wasn't implying that or suggesting that. I didn't mean to sound that way, but it sounded as though those two things could maybe be at odds, right? You're creating a boundary, but at the same time, you're wanting to be connected to that person. My guess would be that maybe that would be difficult when you're just starting that.
It would be difficult. When I was a foster care social worker, I wanted to adopt all the children that I work with. It was just like such a heartbreaking thing for me to see them. Definitely, if you're a beginner, it will be normal that you don't have that, but with
Hmm.
time. And yeah, how do you still stay caring but protect yourself at the same time? And it's crucial, or else we'll have burnouts.
Right, right, right. Wow. And we're talking here, it's the midst in a sense of COVID and the restrictions. How are you working professionally? I mean, are you doing it all virtually or partially virtually?
Partially, at some point for 2 months, we shut down the doors and we did everything virtual.
Right.
And then I saw my clients really decline. I mean, you have to understand it's an intensive outpatient program that I have. So people come anywhere from 3 to 5 hours a day, 5 times a week. So it's not just like a once a week type of therapy, which means clients are in more need of our support. I saw them really going, like getting worse. And I
Mhm.
said, okay, guys, we are essential workers. We have to open. And 80% of the clients really still come in person and don't want to do online sessions.
Wow. Now, are these all people who've experienced sexual trauma?
No, but I would say maybe 80%,
Okay. Wow.
and almost all childhood trauma, attachment.
Wow. Now, in terms of the people who are working for you, what kind of training do they have? Do you require a specific type of training?
Yeah. I actually have two tracks now. I just opened my second track, but I'll first talk about the first one, which is what I call just the center. At the center, the therapists have to be all licensed. They have to be either trained in EMDR, Brainspotting, or one of the somatic ones, so either SE or Sensorimotor. Those are the primary people that are doing really the deep work. And then everyone else is sort of adjunct support therapy. So we have neurofeedback, we have acupuncture, yoga therapy, massage, movement, art therapy, and a psychiatrist that comes in once a week. So everyone is licensed, highly experienced, and they mostly work part-time with me, and they have part-time private practice. And now I just launched the second track, which is I'm calling Reconnect Training Institute. That's where I'm finally able to offer training program for interns. So interns can accrue hours, and then clients can have a more affordable treatment because they will be seen by interns that are trained by me and supervised by me on an ongoing basis. So they are just getting trained in the rhythm model, basically.
Right. Awesome. Okay. So the book is The Trauma Map. We'll have that linked up here at the show notes page at thetraumatherapistpodcast.com. In terms of an additional book recommendation, whether trauma related or not, what would you recommend, Karol?
Can I make two recommendations?
You can.
My favorite one, was the most inspirational book for me, was actually Babette Rothschild, The Body Remembers. I love her books, the case book, the volume 1 and volume 2. Way in the beginning, that's what I just think she has the best book in terms of easy to read and understand. And the second one is, I'm reading it right now, is the Sensorimotor Psychotherapy, Pat Ogden with Janina Fisher. But this one is for both clients and for therapists. So it has different sections. It's just a great way of explaining all the sensorimotor detailed information.
Awesome. All right. Again, we'll have those linked up here at the show notes page. Where's your center located?
Pacific Palisades.
In Los Angeles. Awesome. Yeah. Wow. Well, you've got it going on. I mean, you've got this amazing center that is, to me, really inspiring. I really appreciate the work you're doing, and I'm just glad you're here on this podcast.
Thank you. If you come to LA, please let me know. I would love to.
I will. I have relatives there.
Oh, great.
All right, Karol, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you again.
All right, take care.
You too. Bye.